All right, good evening, everybody. Welcome. Why don't we go ahead and get started? First item on the agenda is the Climate Energy Initiative Status Report. It's Wyatt.
All right. Thank you, Mayor Baruch, members of council. Brenda Carril is going to give tonight's presentation, and the intention is to give council a briefing as to where we are in terms of activities and accomplishments in the area of reducing our carbon emissions, both in the city government and in the community. And it's a tale of two sides of the coin, I would say. On one hand, I think that we can be proud of a record of accomplishments, and we will celebrate one next week, we hope, with the EPA and being named a green power community because we have met their guidelines and crossed the threshold for purchasing sustainable energy. And Brenda will speak a little bit more about that towards the end of our presentation. Our Green Fleet Program, our Sustainable Facilities Policy, a lot of concrete actions that the council has taken. The planning effort associated with our membership in ICLEI, however, has been suspended. And that is in reflection of the fact that as we were really overwhelmed with the work on the transition with the water utility, we acknowledged in FY14, which was the reality of the fact that Brenda and Ken Lasso, whose time had been charged to the general fund to lead this effort and to support our citizens task force, were no longer able to do that. And so the FY14 budget reflects that fact. And so we want to discuss what we have done and the data that we do have, and then at the end have a discussion about where this might be able to go in the future. And I'll turn it over to Brenda to present this information. We're also joined here at the table by Tim Stevens, who's been our leader on our Citizens Climate Change Task Force and has done, as a citizen activist and worker, has done amazing things here to help push the city forward in this area. Internally, it really has been Brenda's leadership who moved us to the Green Fleet Program, the biofuels purchasing, and green purchasing, and our recognition with the green power community. And so let me turn it over to Brenda for this presentation.
Thank you very much, Mayor and members of council. I'm pleased to be here this evening with Mr. Stevens. He's, as the manager mentioned, he's a chair of our Environmental Services Council. He has also stepped up following the recent departure of Ralph Yatsko, and has been chairing the ESC's Energy Efficiency and Climate Change Task Force. The other members of that group were not able to be with us this evening, and that's Art Binkowski and Bob Lofter-Thune. We thank them for all of the work that they've been doing over the last few years and contributing their expertise and their energy and being very, very tenacious in the face of some staffing constraints. Our presentation this evening is going to basically focus on a brief status report on this subject. We'd like to highlight the 2008 baseline greenhouse gas emissions inventory that we've completed. And we'll talk about some accomplishments and some work that's yet to be done that we hope that you'll consider as part of your FY15 budget process. Resolution 2008-41, which was adopted back in 2008, pledged the city to take a leadership role around the issues of climate change and energy efficiency. That resolution also established the city's membership in ICLEI and its partnership with its climate change protocol and its 5-milestone process. In your materials, I've outlined that 5-milestone process. It's pretty straightforward. You conduct a baseline greenhouse gas emissions inventory. You establish a reduction target, develop a plan, an energy plan, implement that, and then monitor your progress against those goals. We have completed milestone 1 and have drafted the 2008 Community and Government Greenhouse Gas Inventory. In addition to that, that initial year's data and analysis, we have collected data for calendar years 2009 through 2012. That data's collected. We'll show some trend data here shortly, but we have not had the resources to analyze that in depth. Some of the key findings for 2008, our community-wide greenhouse gas emissions, about 138,000 metric tons of carbon dioxide. The per capita emissions, 11.5 tons per resident. In terms of our government operations emissions for that same year, about 13,000 metric tons. Some key findings. In terms of our community greenhouse gas emissions inventory, as you can see, our commercial sector is the largest generator of greenhouse gas emissions, followed by our residential sector. In terms of our government operations, buildings and facilities is the largest generator, 49%, almost 50%, followed by our water utility. We have developed the inventory such that the water utility data can be carved out in future. If that's necessary, if the sale of the water system goes through, you'll be able to continue to track forward using just city data. Not surprisingly, the information and the analysis in this report suggests the following areas to pursue. Energy efficiency improvements in residential, commercial, and government buildings is an area that could result in reductions in greenhouse gas emissions, as well as cost savings associated with energy efficiency. Where possible, using renewable energy would also reduce greenhouse gas emissions, and regional transportation initiatives that help reduce vehicle miles traveled, promote mass transit, walkability, fuel efficiency, and the like could be viable initiatives to pursue. In addition, as I mentioned earlier, to the 2008 data, we have collected trend data over time, and you'll see this is the trend data for government. This is without the water utility. The trend until 2011 had been downward. The 2011 data comes from our buildings and facilities sector, so it's tied to our energy usage, and we really don't know much more than that at this point. We have not had an opportunity to analyze that. In terms of community trends, we've had an upward trend until recently. The 2012 drop is reflective of natural gas usage in the community, and again, that's needs to be delved into to better understand that. So in terms of milestones 2 and 3 and the rest of the 5-milestone process, we have suspended that work. Resolution 2010-42 established a community energy planning process, established a community energy plan task force, and that resolution has sunsetted without the establishment of that task force. We just have not had the staff resources or the consulting resources to pursue that. While we have not been able to do that work, we have made progress in some areas on kind of an ad hoc basis. The manager had mentioned our green fleet. For many years now, we have operated a green fleet, purchasing hybrid vehicles where possible, using biofuels for our diesel, our heavy-duty fleet. We have idling restrictions that we follow. We are an EPA Green Power partner. We became a partner last year with the purchase of 5%, matching 5% of our electricity usage with renewable energy. And then just last month, just a couple of weeks ago, the EPA confirmed that we had met our goal for the Green Power Community Challenge. And that is our community, our residents, our businesses have matched 3% of the community-wide energy usage, and that's very exciting. We're hoping to celebrate that on Monday, inviting all of our partners. The EPA has been furloughed, so we may have to wait on that. The council adopted last year a sustainable public facilities policy that has some significant energy efficiency elements to that. So going forward, for eligible facilities, the city would see the benefit of those energy efficiencies. We've been doing lighting retrofits with our traffic signals for years. And so these are just some key areas that would impact on greenhouse gas emissions and oftentimes hand-in-hand energy efficiency. In terms of community outreach, we've established a city webpage. We regularly post content to that webpage, and the Environmental Services Task Group has developed a community outreach plan, which they have not been able to implement yet, but they have developed a plan to take out to the community on this subject. In terms of some current opportunities and future opportunities, we would just like to bring these to your attention. We've talked a little bit about the government and community energy planning process that's been suspended. The regional efforts through COG and the Northern Virginia Regional Commission are also not currently being staffed. As one of your attachments, I would bring your attention to the COG Action Plan for Climate and Energy, and it's really a very good roadmap, I think, for the city going forward. We have accomplished a number of the elements of this plan, but there are areas where we are lagging behind. Energy efficiency, sustainability, some community outreach are areas where we haven't made a lot of progress. Northern Virginia Regional Commission, they have an energy work group and an energy planning group, and are doing lots of work, have a lot of opportunities available to the city through that group as well. They're working on and will soon have a Northern Virginia regional greenhouse gas inventory completed. They'll be updating that annually. That may be an opportunity for the city to continue this work through that group in the future. They're doing pilot work around home energy audits. They're doing a lot of work in terms of the commercial sector, some toolkits for commercial buildings and the like. So that is, there are opportunities associated with that group. Our green power programs require some modest staff oversight and reporting going forward. The community outreach that we've talked about, information that's helpful to the public in terms of accessing energy audits and energy coaching, opportunities to purchase renewable energy certificates and other similar activities. Staff support for the task group concluded in August, and that group has disbanded. And we have no liaison right now relative to the DVP Smart Meter program, and they have some pilot opportunities as well. So these are just some things that we wanted to make sure the council was aware of, and hope that that as next steps, you would consider this in future policy discussions to determine whether an energy and environmental policy around this is part of your planning, and then the budget process is another opportunity to take this up. So I don't know whether Tim had any other comments at this time.
Yeah, I would just add that this attachment E, which is this Climate, Energy, and Environment Policy Committee, the COG group, is really what it is a community energy plan. And you might say, so what? But our neighbors to the east, Arlington, has a world-class community energy plan, and they paid about $400,000 for it. We have a very good plan that we can use here that's no additional charge. Just a little additional staff effort is about all it would take for us to play in that game. So we'll just highlight that. Otherwise, I think the presentation speaks for itself.
I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Can we get the lights? Dave, I know that you needed to head
Sure.
out. Do you want-
Thanks a lot. I apologize in advance. I need to run to catch a plane from National Airport here in about an hour and a half. I want to thank you for the work that you've done, and the Environmental Services Council and the staff. Had an opportunity to participate with COG when they drafted their first climate action plan, and it's really gratifying to see the progress we've been made. Another good news story was the region's air quality has not been better in the recent past than it has been. I want to especially recognize the work of Johanna Berry on the COG efforts as well. So I look forward to seeing what we can do in the future to further not only improve the environment, but also make the case that economically it makes sense, and in terms of convenience and quality of life, so that all of those things can be part of our decision-making going forward. I also wanted to make a couple quick comments about a couple other agenda items. First of all, I'm glad we are moving forward on the mobile food vendors ordinance, and we're continuing that discussion, and hopefully we'll end up with a satisfactory balance on that one. And especially I wanted to note the Tinner Hill work. This is the kind of thing that will leave a legacy for this, a positive legacy from this council for decades to come, in terms of celebrating the courage of our citizens in the earliest days of the civil rights movement. I mean, literally midway between the Civil War and the civil rights movement of the 1960s. And so I very much hope we can move forward on that. I know there are a few details out there still, but it's a wonderful step forward. So I wanted to thank all the members of council for the work that we've collectively done in a number of these areas, and that we're committing to do in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Vice Mayor Snyder. Other council members, questions for Brenda? Okay.
A couple questions. So, in looking at your presentation, your materials, some of the materials discussed total CO2 carbon, emissions and the like. Is that for city government or for the entire community?
It's for both. We did an inventory for the government, and we did a community inventory.
How did you do the community inventory, by the way? Just looking at natural gas consumption, electricity
Right.
consumption?
We worked with DVP and Washington Gas to get that information. In terms of transportation, we did some extrapolations from some COG data. When we did the 2008 inventory, they had not yet refined their transportation data for smaller cities. So we extrapolated from Arlington, but that information's now being made available to us annually through COG. So
And how does our per capita consumption compare, for example, to Arlington?
I think there, in 2007, they were at 13.7 metric tons. We, in a year later, at 11.5. So at that point in time, we were slightly lower than theirs, but it depends to some extent, how they calculated their greenhouse gas inventory.
Plus, they have a larger commercial segment, and that contributes to about an additional 10 to 15% increase in per capita.
Okay. Let me ask you just sort of on a slightly separate item. Has the city considered getting electric vehicles? They seem like they'd be kind of ideally suited for sort of short trips and be able to charge overnight. Any consideration of that at all, like purchasing electric vehicles for, inspections or whatever it is? It's a pretty short little distance to go around.
We have been able to take advantage of buying hybrids, as you know. Electric vehicles, there was a COG initiative to buy a whole fleet of Nissan electric vehicles, and that did not result in us getting any vehicles. I don't know exactly what happened with that program. Brenda, do you have anything to add on that?
I think it's something that, the composition of our fleet, I think, is something we should continue to look at. We started our hybrid program, 5, 6, 7 years ago, and technology has changed and there are other opportunities. So I think it's worth revisiting.
Yeah, I would encourage him. It's such a small little place, 2.2 square miles. Seems like it's really suited for that kind of fleet vehicles, and they're not that much more expensive than regular vehicles. Let me ask you, do other communities offer incentives for, sustainable energy? For example, like, hey, will the city themselves or the county in Arlington contribute for geothermal or solar? Are any of our locality neighbors doing incentives for those kind of things?
Generally not in Virginia.
Okay.
Our neighbors in Maryland have been pretty good. They offer state rebates. Even places like Frederick offer encouragement for solar, and they've got some interesting collections of net zero houses up there that the governor has visited and made kind of press releases associated with that. So Virginia has a little catching up to do.
And then lastly, the task force, what would that take to kind of get going again? I mean, as far as staff time, is that something that the staff is interested in pursuing?
I think it depends upon the expectations of staff in terms of the work plan. If it's just to, they meet once a month for a couple of hours, but it depends upon the level of staff support that you're expecting in terms of moving forward on any of these projects. And I think that's where we've had just a little bit of a disconnect in the past.
So what city councils had greater expectations than you're able to provide?
We just haven't had the staffing to accomplish everything that, we haven't been able to have adequate staffing to pursue the COG work plan.
It's very complex technical work, and so Brenda and Ken have managed to get themselves very well informed on this, and they were able to pick it up for short periods of time to move the ball forward. And so that is a model that we could try to pursue in the future. But it is, the technical complexity behind this is intense. And so you need someone who can really understand it. And then, working with the data, just as, we have some charts now on our raw data, on our emissions data. And that's helpful, but you would really want to control for weather. You want to control for other independent variables so you can really understand what policy driving a different result, so you can control for that. That's very complex statistical work, and so those are the shortcomings that we have.
And I think we had been moving forward, and we were poised to initiate the community energy planning work. And that, when you're bringing, academics and business folks and staff and representatives from utilities and, engage in a comprehensive planning effort like that, you want to be able to make sure it's worth, people's time and that it's well planned. And we just really didn't have the resources to move that forward in an effective way. So rather than, try to piece something together. We just said, let's stop and reevaluate.
Okay, thank you very much.
Mr. Kelly?
If memory serves, and I could be wrong, we cut the sustainability coordinator out of the budget. So we did it. We cut it out.
The coordinator, we didn't necessarily, I mean, I don't know whether staff, I was basically, the line of questioning was whether the staff had an interest in pursuing it and the time for it. Not necessarily with hiring a new person, but with the existing resources. I think we got our answer, but it doesn't mean that we need to hire another person.
Well,
I think
this is an ongoing, I won't be around for, but this is, Dave, I have to tell you, you can't keep cutting the staff side and then ask them to do more work.
I didn't ask them to do more work. I asked them whether
Can
they
we
had the
stop-
time for doing
can we
it.
stop
And the
ping-ponging?
inclination.
Jesus Christ, Dave.
All right.
Could I ask a question? At some point, I don't want to cut you
As,
off.
as long as it's a question and not ping ponging, I think we're good. Mr. Duncan?
My ping pong days are, once my son was able to beat me in table tennis, I laid my racket down and vowed no more. Thank you for all the opportunities are very exciting, I think. It is a little intimidating, the range of opportunities that there are. And given that we have constraints, even if we are able to allocate more staff resources, which I assume is something that we might see proposed in the next budget, even if we are able to do that, I guess I would, having just come from the TJ event where we cut the ribbon on the new addition there, and the mayor's remarks, I think, said the building was first built in 1948 or, like 70 years ago, tells me that perhaps the thing you could do of longest lasting impact as you sit here today would be when we plan new public facilities, really, concentrate our efforts on trying to make those facilities, whether it's, a 20-year rehab or a 50 to 70-year build new, really try to make those facilities absolutely as state-of-the-art as they can be today. So if you're allocating resources when you make your proposal for the next budget, I would urge us to really concentrate on that public buildings aspect because, we know we're going to do something to City Hall, the library, Cherry Street, Mount Daniel, and a new high school. That's 5 buildings. I mean, surely that would be the biggest impact we could make during our time here that would last for multiple generations.
Yeah, I would just add too, going back and looking at the data that's in the chart, 75% of our greenhouse gas emissions come from buildings. So you leverage your best opportunity for improvement by focusing on the energy efficiency of buildings, which incidentally saves you money. So you get a twofer for it.
Well, on that point, we had that debate too, and it'll keep going, and there is a definite price tag, and it can be done, and it's a matter of if we want to do that, just like we had the talk about what code. One of the questions, though, when Mr. Tartar asked about how it compares to other jurisdictions, and that's always one of the challenges here. You throw lots of numbers up, and they don't mean a whole lot in a vacuum. The problem is, and I do this for our company, so I've seen the same problem, there's no standardized way to measure this, and there's no way to tell what goes into it, which is why it's really hard to compare this from place to place, unless you sign up for one of these registries or something and use their methodology, but there's a price tag with that, and then there's a debate about which one. Have we thought about, I'm surprised for governments there's not some sort of standard or a
There
movement
is.
towards a benchmark.
ICLEI is one of those. Many jurisdictions have used that. Northern Virginia Regional Commission is using the ICLEI protocol.
So maybe we could compare at least to jurisdictions that are using the same protocol, because I think that would help a whole lot to put this in perspective. Otherwise, it doesn't mean a whole lot by itself.
You're right. I think the key is to get it into one system, and so otherwise you get double counting if everybody
Right.
does it their own way. So I think getting it into COG, Northern Virginia Regional Commission, and have them kind of do that so that we all are on the same page and using the same model makes
Right,
a lot
so
of
maybe
sense.
anything we can do to champion that among some of these regional bodies might be very helpful if they haven't all adopted that.
Ms. Berry?
Well, I'm delighted to hear Phil so excited about, green and LEED certifications. I mean, that we've been talking about on council now for a couple of years. And as Ron said, it comes with a price tag. But I'm delighted that there's great enthusiasm, which will be carried on long after I'm off council. But I certainly echo all attempts to become and continue to be not only just green, but in lockstep with our colleagues in Arlington and Fairfax and Washington, D.C. I also agree with Mr. Tarter that I very much like the idea of moving forward on, especially given our footprint, on things like electric vehicles. As Mr. Snyder said, I do represent council on both the Climate and Energy Policy Commission, Chesapeake Bay, and the COG Air Quality. But I did want, Wyatt, could you hold up the scorecard document there? The Climate and Energy Progress Report. That the City of Falls Church is one of 9 or 11 jurisdictions that complies with the scorecard on all manner of things, green fleets, canopy, greenhouse emissions, energy plans, et cetera. And I do want to signal that the City of Falls Church comes out, I think, remarkably well on all of the data points. There are some that we could do better, but I think that the fact that we've got such a terrific citizen committee effort, as well as a basic mindset, both in our city charter, our city mission, and the men and women on city council who are committed to seeing that Falls Church remains green and appropriate, I think is extremely important. So I am not, as I say, I'm not going to be around to ensure that scorecard continues to get A+, but I have great faith that both staff and the network of citizen committees will ensure that such a thing happens. And again, Phil, take up the LEED certification. Keep it going. Great.
Thank you. Just a couple comments. I think we've there's been a lot of discussion, certainly in the national and world media, about climate change and certainly energy sustainability. And I think that's certainly a key aspect here in the City of Falls Church. And I think it's going to ultimately be up to individuals and local communities to really lead and be on the forefront of some of the actions. I think given Falls Church's size, that the community energy plans may be something that's ultimately doable and reachable within the city, given our unique demographics and size. And I know that we've had a somewhat difficult time getting there just because of the staffing issues, et cetera, that we've had, and trying to figure out exactly what our bandwidth is in the City of Falls Church. I'd be interested in getting a better handle of what would be entailed if we were going to go down the route of the community energy plans, with the caveat of talking and speaking to some of the other local leaders, and this has come up in numerous regional discussions. I don't think we're going to be able to do everything that Arlington's doing. Frankly, they're way out ahead, and I think they're positioned financially a little bit differently than we are, to be honest. They can sort of afford to do a lot of planning work on the community energy plans, but they've also, I think, left a lot that we can utilize and look to Arlington as a real leader in this front without sort of having to recreate what they've done. And I think there's a lot there that we could utilize, and a lot of resources, hopefully with Arlington County and also with COG and VRC. So I'd be interested in figuring out what it would entail for us to, and I'm glad to hear that we don't have to do a whole plan over again, but really working on implementing a plan and what that would entail. So I'm just very pleased, Tim, that we're not talking about we have to actually, that there is a plan there that we could actually begin to utilize. So really what it would take to implement that plan, and really educating the community also about what a community energy plan is, and what it means for the future of the city and for the future of the country at large, because I do think this is going to be a key effort as we go forward, along with all the other energy initiatives that we've talked about. Mr. Killen?
Again, this is very important, and if it is to succeed, It has to be given the tools to succeed. It's all great to say, let's see what we can do, let's see if we can squeeze out here, let's see. But if it's not given the tools to succeed, it's simply going to engender further citizen skepticism about the seriousness of the city council. So either we do it right, but don't start it and do it 20% right, because then it's not going to work. So we have to make sure we calibrate the resources to our objectives. That's all I'm saying.
Thank you. And I think several of us are asking exactly what's entailed to, for example, bring forward the community energy plans, understanding, again, as I mentioned, glad to hear that there is a plan, that we don't actually have to expend resources to bring the plan forward, but to implement it. But I don't think we know what the costs
Well,
are.
there's
Am I getting too
Yeah.
far?
You're getting ahead of us. We don't actually, what we have is our baseline data, but we have not adopted in Falls Church our energy plan, which would be milestone 2 of the ICLEI protocol. Now, we've got great models in the region that we could borrow the best parts of and apply them here, but we haven't done that work yet. And so I just wanted to note that.
Yeah, I guess just from my perspective, given what I understand Arlington's done, and again, Arlington is really the forefront of this, I don't think that we could, to Mr. Kalen's point, do that level of a plan. I don't think financially it's it's just not right sized for Falls Church. But I think that there is a similar plan, borrowing from best practices, that we can put forward and still do a lot of good and really move the ball forward, understanding that we're going to have to allocate resources to that. So I hope that we can go in that direction. But again, it would have to be Falls Church sized, not Arlington sized, understanding that even with that, additional resources are going to have to come to bear. So that's just, I don't know where other council members are, but that's sort of my view. And I know I'm not being granular with this, but at least I hope I'm providing some level of insight, at least as one individual council member, where I hope this can go.
And I would just say, before we get away from the table here, that I think Falls Church has done a lot over the last couple of years with just a quarter of a person's time, and I think a lot of the credit for that goes to Brenda. I mean, the fact that we've been able to some degree run with the fast horses, I think, has a lot to do with what she and Ken have been able to do. So we'll miss them.
And then I should just add, given that some of this material is going to possibly go to the EPA if my name is not on the reports, et cetera. So if we can manage that, that'd be great. Help me keep my day job. So I believe I sent a note out already to the city manager about that. But Brenda, I wanted you to know as well. So if we can just not make sure that my name isn't on the documents. All right. Thank you all.
Thank you.
We're on the next agenda item on the mobile food vendors ordinance.
Nancy Vincent, if she could come and join us here. By way of introduction, currently under the city's zoning code, we do not allow temporary vendors of any kind, including mobile food vendors, for any period more than 30 days in a given calendar year. From time to time, we've gotten requests from mobile vendors who would like to operate, mobile food vendors who would like to operate in the city. We have told them in the past that that's not allowed in our zoning code, and that's been that. Recently, we did have a request for one, and there was a petition drive and a lot of interest around bringing this particular mobile food vendor to the city. I want the council to be aware that I received a formal petition drive that had 180 emails that were sent to me on it, so I wanted council to be aware of that. Those petitions did not go directly to the city council. So I did ask Nancy to lead a task force to look at the zoning code and look at some guidelines that we'd use if we were to choose to allow mobile food vendors in the city. And so what's before council is a draft zoning text amendment and a set of guidelines that are currently out for public comment. The task force that Nancy put together was composed of our constitutional officers, city staff, our zoning administrator, for instance, the fire marshal, the Chamber of Commerce, and 2 business owners in the city. And they came up with a set of guidelines, and I think probably the easiest way to have a discussion about it, because we can see how deep of a dive the council wants to have on this policy question and take our direction from you tonight. But this matrix lays out sort of the big questions. Where could a mobile food vendor operate? What are the permissions needed? What hours can they operate? What fees do they need to pay to operate? And what are the regulatory requirements prior to beginning mobile vending? So on the far right hand is what is encompassed in the city's policy that's out for comment right now. And then all of our surrounding jurisdictions are on the columns to the left of that. I think it's a very handy guide just to compare to what we have on the table right now that the task force came up with. And let's use that as just a quick summary of what we're proposing and get your reactions to it. Nancy.
Okay. I want to start out by
Got it.
I'm sorry, a community gathering opportunity. And then also for other work sites have requested it, including individuals here at City Hall have made this request. So those are some reasons why this issue is coming forward. Turning to the matrix, and I do want to start out by thanking Becky Witzman, who's here from the Economic Development Office. She's the one who put this together and did a great job. So I want to recognize her work there.
I guess, Nancy, I've got a quick question just before we get, was that sort of an underlying assumption that would be sort of where we would be headed as far as servicing construction sites, or was it more of the model, and I see that they're missing from the list of sort of comparisons, the DC model, which seems to be a little bit broader, not just servicing construction sites, but also utilizing it more as other alternatives, social gathering and food. So I just want to get a sense of what the goals of the group were, because I think that ultimately may lead in different directions.
Mm-hmm. And the group was looking at it very broadly, as far as what would be allowable and what would not be allowable. In the city, there's another kind of a separate procedure for city events, like the farmers market or Memorial Day, where food vendors come to the city and operate. So the question of construction sites, other times, just come at lunchtime to serve the various businesses, or as stated, any other events that come. These guidelines are meant to cover to cover those kinds of.
But just one note, under this proposed policy, they would not be allowed in the public right-of-way. DC, they are obviously allowed in the public right-of-way. It is a huge industry in DC, and they have a big office that regulates who gets what spots, and it's a pretty big operation. The Northern Virginia jurisdictions don't have that type of a big operation for the street vendors. So there is a big difference between the Northern Virginia approach generally and the DC approach, or what you might see in New York City or downtown.
And I guess that's, perhaps, I'm sorry if I'm getting ahead of fellow council members, but I just wanted to shape this discussion a little bit. Do we look at that option, or was that sort of not where we were headed? And again, I'm not advocating for that, but I want to get a sense of where we're at and what options we're looking at.
You mean look at the option of
right
allowing them to operate in a public right-of-way?
Correct.
That was not included in the zoning code amendment
So it was
we're talking about
discussed, but it's not in the draft policy that's before you. I would suggest that the two reasons it's not is, one, that's a whole different level of regulation because we'd really need to monitor it because it becomes very competitive. And for the restaurant community, location is everything. And so if the right-of-way is wide open now for anyone to come into the street and open up business, that's a very different change in the business
So
climate.
it sounds like it was looked at and moved in
That's-
a different direction.
That's right.
Okay.
And be happy to continue the discussion if you want to go in that direction, but those are two reasons.
No,
why.
I just wanted to know whether it was, because it's really two different ways of going, and I just wanted to get a sense of whether it was looked at and discussed, and then it moved in a different direction.
Right.
Sorry to.
That's fine. So when we look at the question of where, and that goes to the comments that Mayor Baruch was stating, the the proposal is that food trucks be allowed to operate only on private property, not in the public right of way, and only with the permission of the property owner, and in the very specific zoning areas. That's not always the case in the other jurisdictions. Arlington has a limited public property allowance, and you can see in looking at this chart. As far as a site plan or zoning approval, site plan is probably a misnomer, and if we look at it as zoning approval, it's zoning approval needed, and the city is recommending that yes, that zoning office look at where these food trucks will operate. For example, if one of them comes to a construction site, then zoning would need to know where on the construction site that the vendor would be parked, so to speak. When can they operate? The different jurisdictions have different rules. Arlington, it's all day for the most part. Fairfax, not to exceed 3 hours, and the recommendation of the study group was that it wouldn't not exceed 3 hours, be parked in one place for more than 3 hours in the city. As far as fees, and I'll say once I go through this, then I'll talk about the comments, because we did receive several comments about the fees that are being proposed here. That the other jurisdictions, Arlington and Alexandria, charge a $500 fee for this. Fairfax is much lower. And so the proposal was to charge a $500 fee in Falls Church, but that would be in addition to the zoning occupancy permit. And so we received several comments that is much too high of a fee, and that'll likely be looked at when the study group reconvenes. Fingerprinting is required by all the jurisdictions, and we received several comments about that, and that's a safety issue. The police department also fingerprints several kinds of businesses in the city, and so that they need to know who it is that's operating these units, and that's a way to do that. And then looking at the regulatory requirements, we're asking that there be proof that there's sales tax is going to be paid, and a lot of this is to be sure that the food vendors are on the same footing as the brick and mortar restaurants and are following the same regulations that the brick and mortar restaurants follow, so that they will be paying meals taxes. We did say the occupancy permit, the food establishment permit, they'll go through the health department inspections, and that they're each operator or each employee who will be operating the unit must have a food manager card. And then once all these requirements are met, the proposal is that the city issue a mobile food vendor sticker that be displayed prominently on the unit, and that be enforced. And so that if there's a unit operating in the city that does not have the sticker and that has not gone through this procedure, that there be a significant fine levied against that particular vendor. Now, excuse me, I wanted to let you know that we so far have received several comments from the public. One, as I mentioned already, is that there's comments that the fees are high, that how does this work with the city events, that something like this would be fun to have in the city, that fairness to brick and mortar restaurants be taken into account, that the approval process is too cumbersome, that there'd be a designated place in the city to operate similarly as in DC, as the mayor mentioned. So what I'd like to do at this point is to ask you all for your comments. The study group will reconvene on Thursday, and so wanted to add your comments to those of the public. So I can open it up.
Why don't we go around the horn? Why don't we start with Phil?
Thanks. Two questions. One, so as I understand it, the scheme is going to be, if we're not allowing public right-of-way use, is that a private property owner, whether a construction site or a business or a private residence, would arrange with a mobile food cart vendor to locate on that private property owner's property. And that would resolve the kind of fistfights that were being described about, jockeying for prime position. Is that right? I mean,
It's only on
Right,
fees.
Right, it would just be in the areas that are zoned, and that is
okay, so that's.
B1, B2, B3,
I think I
M1.
probably read that and forgot it if I did. So would a private resident be able to make use of a food cart vendor for a yard party or a block party or something like that?
That in fact was a question that came up, and how would this apply in that particular instance?
Okay, well, I'm not original, but I am still curious.
But so, but that's good, because it was a good question. So that's something that I'll bring to the
Oh, okay.
study group
Oh,
to see
okay.
if that
It
should
was
be,
brought up, but-
if there should
no.
be an exemption for that or not, or how it should be handled, or where those should be parked.
Okay, so just something that further to be discussed. Okay. The other question was about a business license and an occupancy permit, which are two different things, of course. When I got my business license to operate here, I just, got underway and off I went. And my occupancy permit came, 30 or 60 days later at some juncture. But if these cart vendors are going to be getting a business license from Clinton's office, is there a time lag between when you get your business license and when they're able to do the inspection and the fire marshal comes out and gives the occupancy permit, I guess?
It can take some, and in some cases, a significant amount of time to get the license. So the requirement will be that it be applied for.
Okay, so we're not setting up some separate track that we're going to fast track, mobile food cart vendors. They're just going to get in the queue with every other business which is applied for business license and may or may not have received it. They'll just be in line. So anybody doing a mobile food cart needs to know that even though there are not that many of them, there are many other businesses that they'll have to wait in line to get their occupancy permit.
And their business license,
So you can't get your business, you can't just start up immediately. It'll take some time.
to go through this process, exactly.
Okay, thanks.
Mr. Callen?
Thank you. I support the idea of allowing the food carts in the city. This is very, to put it in terminology that I'm comfortable with. What we have here is a list of what is perceived to be the necessary barriers to entry to keep it from becoming a free-for-all. Fair enough. What I think would be very useful, because some of these barriers are less clear to me than others, and I have to say, until we know what the demand is going to be for this, it's going to be hard to know what the appropriate licensing fee or the registration fee might be. That you review it on a yearly basis and then reevaluate these criteria to see if they're all necessary or if in fact some others have to be added. The difficulty is that we often try to solve all of the issues at the same time at the beginning before we have any real experience on how it's going to operate. And that's probably not the best way to go about it. We really should get some experience. Probably have a minimum number of barriers if we can, and see how it goes. Again, ideally, if you could calibrate the fee structure to the amount of money the city has to spend to manage it, that would be good. But if there's only a couple of vendors, that may not be feasible. So it depends on how popular it becomes. But I think this is a very good idea, and applaud the people who've been pushing to get an opportunity to do it.
Can I
Go ahead, Nancy.
make a comment? Something Mr. Kalin's comments. I did want to say that the comments have been overwhelmingly in favor. I mean, not all, but overwhelmingly in favor of allowing food trucks to operate in the city, in agreement with what you said. And as far as the fees go, another consideration that the study group wanted to take into account was the fairness to the brick and mortar restaurants. So to somehow use the fee structure to make sure that there's a level playing field with the food vendors and the restaurants and what they have to pay to operate. So that was just another consideration.
Other council members? Ms. Perry?
I don't know if I'm putting words in Mr. Kalin's mouth, but I like the idea of this debate, of this conversation being aspirational as well as, as you put, barriers, prescriptive. So what is it that we do want, which I think would be a useful conversation to have. I actually have a couple of just very specific questions. I'm private property only business and multi-use zoning. So, for instance, the food truck that shows up in front of my house 5 days a week to service Northgate. It's not actually on private property. It's actually sitting on East Jefferson Street in front of the Bernardo's house. What constitutes private property? Because it's not. It's the street. And I'm just wondering, that's, unless you had a place that you could pull into, I get that, but right now for the last, 8 months, 9 months, the food truck shows up and parks on the street. So just asking that question. I presume that the fees we're talking about are annual? An annual $500? Okay. And the third is the health inspection that we're talking about. Are these also site, every now and again, sort of surprise site inspections? Like you do in any other restaurant? Sort of pop in and say, what's going on here? Just a question. And then fourth is, how do you control, or is there language to control what I would call the occasional infrastructure, which is that you have a food truck and then maybe you put out a couple of chairs. And then maybe you put out a flower pot, and then you put out, as you say, an umbrella. I didn't even think about a generator. So whether you call it the occasional infrastructure or the creeping infrastructure, just curious as to how we might have that conversation. Done. Those are my questions.
Shall I address?
Please.
Okay. The first one with parking on the street, the guidelines that are now written would prohibit that. So if the new rules are adopted as it's written now, then that truck that parks on the street in your neighborhood would be in violation, would be fined. So that's something. The health department question.
I'll be tired. Getting the email from me.
The health department question, I did also pose that question, and they do an initial inspection. As far as the surprise inspections, they don't go out looking for the food trucks, not knowing where they're going to be parked on any specific day. So brick and mortar restaurants are inspected every 6 months. The food trucks are not inspected as frequently, just because of their mobile nature.
And the occasional infrastructure?
And the occasional infrastructure, that's what the 3-hour limit was, part of what the 3-hour limit was attempting to address.
Okay. I'll go and then we'll keep going around the horn. So just two general comments. I sort of started getting into this a little bit when we started the discussion. This goes to what Mr. Kalin, I think, was getting at too, given some of the barriers. The way that this is sounding is that it's really geared towards construction. And I hope that we can do a little bit better than that, while yet maintaining fairness to the brick and mortar businesses. Because if we're just trying to, address construction, frankly, I think we could just do fine by encouraging the construction workers to have catered out from our brick and mortar community. So I hope that we're actually looking towards not just providing convenience towards construction companies, but trying to do a bit more than that, energizing the community, but yet maintaining fairness to our brick and mortar businesses as well. I think one, it's the way this sort of comes out as I'm reading through this. For example, T-zones are left out, and I question why. Some of the T zones have been left out, and there may be a way of looking at that selectively on the T zones. Two, this goes to Phil's point about whether it might be appropriate to have some exceptions for festivals. I know that we've talked about certain festival areas in the city. It could be very exciting, for example, to have a food cart sort of contest as part of Parks and Recs, things of that nature that help build community appropriately, but yet don't detract from brick and mortar. And then just looking at some of the finer details of this, the not to exceed 3 hours, there may be a need to have, if we sort of go in this direction, we may want to look at hour limits as well, like time-wise, not just 3 hours, but 3 hours within X period of time. And then as far as the fees,
3 hours.
well, the way that it reads right now is,
7 and 10?
no, well, if you look at some of the other jurisdictions, they have, for example, between 8 a.m. and 8 p.m. So I think we don't necessarily want them operating 24 hours.
Right.
There needs to be some hours, but they can operate for 3 hours within that window. Because the way that this reads simply is it could theoretically be, in the middle of the night for 3 hours.
Yikes.
So I don't think that's what the intent is, but
The incredibly vibrant 12 to 3 crowd.
I homecoming comes to mind that just happened this past weekend. So as a new father, I start wondering about these things.
Oh, my Lord. You've got some time later.
2 a.m. in the morning.
Well, if you start sleeping through the time, then we'll worry about that.
And the other is the user fee, I'm sorry, about the fee issues. Given that there is going to be cost to the city on this, I think the fees should be calibrated to whatever it costs the city to recoup those fees, in fairness to the brick and mortar as well. And then finally, just sort of in the weeds question also, as far as fingerprinting, what exactly are we doing with the fingerprints? Other than capturing them, understanding that the police want to know who the vendors are, but
Right, verifying identity.
A lot of money laundering that takes place.
well, we can talk about that. But I mean, are we putting something into place where if you're, say, a felon, no license for you?
Can't serve tacos.
I mean,
There's no regulations about criminal record.
okay. So it's just a way of tracking,
Very
basically.
right.
Okay. Okay. That's all I have.
Yeah, I've got a few comments and questions. One, I guess, as far as comment goes, I would suggest that the fees be comparable to our neighbors. It looks like, according to this, they're maybe as much as 50% higher than some of our neighboring jurisdictions. I think, I think we ought to just be as close as we can to some of our neighbors. I think this is a neat kind of experiment and to create some vibrancy here in the city, and I think it ought to be encouraged. But I think we need to make sure we go with deliberation. Have you had comments or sought comments from the Chamber of Commerce yet?
The Chamber has been a participant in the study group, so has been involved all along the way.
Gotcha. Okay, good. And restaurants as well, local restaurants through the Chamber or individually on their own?
Two of the city restaurateurs have been participating in the study group.
And have they been in
then
favor, have the restaurateurs been in favor of this?
Mhm.
Any thought that they might actually participate? In other words, just, hey, we're already making, seafood, well, let's have a truck ourselves. It's just a way to expand our
Absolutely.
business. So
Mhm.
they're interested as
Mhm.
well. Okay. I guess I would also say that I'm not so sure just having this purely on private property appeals to me. Maybe it's a first step, but I think in the long run, trying to create a vibrant place, that having it on city streets might be a good idea. Certainly restrictions on where it might be and how it might interfere with parking, but I imagine we can overcome that and actually have this on city streets. You'd mentioned, I think, that folks in City Hall had requested this. How would they, would they just walk to the nearest piece of property that's privately held that would allow this? It wouldn't be allowed on city property?
Well, it's meant to be really the public right-of-way. So if someone wanted to set up a mobile vendor on City Hall, they'd come to us as the property owner, and we would consider their application and either grant it or decline. So it would not be prohibited.
Oh, I see. So this is not intending it to
It's
be.
meant to be prohibited on the public right-of-way.
Gotcha, only streets.
Yeah.
Again, I
I
still.
think opposite of DC.
Okay. I still think it would be a good idea to consider this for public streets as well, subject to restriction and things like that. Also, I guess I'm a little concerned. To me, there are probably greater health issues with a mobile food service than there are in a brick and mortar food service. I mean, it's not 110 degrees, inside a restaurant, but it is maybe outside in a parking lot. And so I guess I would probably be in favor of having more inspections, not less, for mobile truck vendors. It seems to me like there's greater risk of spoilage or things like that without full electricity and other things that might be more related to health. I don't know if you were kind of getting to concerns about fingerprinting, but I actually do have kind of constitutional kind of issues with fingerprinting people who happen to work in a truck versus someone who happens to work in a brick and mortar establishment. I'm not sure what the underlying, to me it's kind of a big threshold to fingerprint somebody, and it seems to me someone who's making tacos or whatever they might be flipping burgers doesn't because they happen to be in a truck as opposed to in a restaurant. Seems that they shouldn't have any less rights to personal privacy or whatever it might be to not be fingerprinted. So I'm not sure how much I would support that. Let's see. You'd also mentioned in here, I guess there's no retail sales, which, I'm not sure there's a big demand for it. In other words, your staff report indicates there's no sales of retail goods. It's only food. Am I missing something in your staff report?
No, you're correct. The guidelines that are being proposed here would only cover food sales.
Gotcha. I mean, I wouldn't really have an issue to the extent there was demand to sell some other products from a truck. I'm not sure there's much difference kind of in my own mind of why selling some other product would be different than selling food. I'm not sure there's enough demand for it. I mean, I guess the comment either made or inferred by Ira about revisiting this after a year or so, I think would be healthy to do, smart for us to go back and take a look, see how things have worked. It's new for us, but it's been done in other jurisdictions around here. We're not late to the table. There is data, there is experience in the area, but I think we still should take a look at it in a year. I don't see that there's going to be some overwhelming, 50 trucks are going to be parked out front. I don't think there's demand in this city at this point. I think it's somewhat ironic, though, that Ms. Berry was talking about trucks being parked in the street for the past 8 months when they're not even allowed in the city, right? And now we're talking about saying, we're not going to let you be on the street, even though they've been doing it apparently quite, out in public for the past 8 months. So I hope that everybody's getting treated fairly. In other words, that we're not coming down on someone too hard who's trying to go by the rules and yet at the same time allowing somebody to flaunt them without recourse. So let me see if I have any other comments. I think that's it. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Dave. Ron?
Not much more that hasn't already said. I think if you ask the average person on the street what it means to have a mobile food policy, they think we're going to look like DC and have trucks parked on the streets. So I think we're setting people up for, we better explain what we're talking about, because I don't think people understand that's what's on the table here. Maybe there's first steps to take and other things to do, but as you guys have already said, there's other opportunities and certain demand out there, while at the same time you're trying to attract restaurants and they don't always like the competition. On the other hand, sometimes the restaurants want in on it and they want to be part of it. So, you know, it goes both ways. Kind of depends on which restaurants you're talking to and how forward-thinking they are.
Chicken.
Regarding Dave's question regarding fingerprinting, I think we should find out what the rationale is for the fingerprinting before we say it's not a good idea.
Well, I think did we hear the rationale for it?
Well, I mean, to talk
Track
to
and quote,
specific,
keep track of people.
Do it, right.
but there
do
must
it.
be something behind it. Why do they want to do it? I mean, it's not just that they want to keep it. I think that's pretty clear, but there must have been some specific tracking that they felt was necessary. I don't know that,
Maybe it's to get a license.
I don't know, whatever it is, but it would be good to know why other jurisdictions feel they need to track somebody
Is
to
it the
see if it's
healthcare
relevant to the
Is it the health department
Falls Church, that's all.
No, it's a police department requirement, and there are certain businesses in the city that are also fingerprinted.
Why don't we do this rather than venturing to guess? Why don't we? And again, Dave, I wasn't necessarily going down the same area that you were, but it struck me if you're going to fingerprint, you should have a reason. So I think if we can have a conversation with the chief and just get back to the council about what the purpose would be, because if we're fingerprinting just to fingerprint,
So that's why we'll find out why.
well, if we can just find out, I'd prefer to just hear from the police chief on this before. And normally, I'm sorry, we don't take public comments during work sessions, so I think we'll get back to the bottom of it. My sense is that there's probably a good reason why it's happening.
Could I ask just one other question about the bike trail?
Sure.
I meant to ask that as part of my questions. The, most trafficked highway in the city, which does not have restaurants anywhere on it, is the bike trail. Would the Northern Virginia Park Authority participate in this? If we had people who were applying to vend near the bike trail, would we deal with that?
That's a good question, and that one hasn't come up yet. So I will add this to the agenda to look into. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much.
Did you have a comment?
No?
We're
Okay,
late.
thanks. Yes, we are.
Yes, we are.
All right, we're on the
Move
catch
along.
grants.
All right, thank you. I think I'll let you introduce. Yours is already on, so watch out. It's that green light on.
Super.
So you're
Thank you. Awesome.
Are you
Thanks.
ready, Mayor?
Yeah, and I think we can probably go through this pretty quick.
So this evening, we have the opportunity to bring to you the second year of arts and cultural grants based on council fundings for FY14. I do want to do introductions and then turn it over mostly to Rachel to do the presentation. But we are asking council to review the recommendations from the Little City Catch Foundation for the FY14 grants. So we do hope to be able to bring it forward at your next council meeting. But to Wyatt's right is Rachel Critton, who is now our Cherry Hill Farmhouse coordinator and is part of joining us for that important facility and historic programming. She will be undertaking the work with Catch and our Arts and Cultural Grant. And behind me in the way back, sitting next to Danny, is Amy Maltese, who will be our Special Events Coordinator. And in those two positions, Rachel works directly with Amy, and then Amy to Danny. And I know we have in the audience, yep, we still do, Ed and Nikki Henderson, which will, of course, be here for the next Tinner Hill, but they're very active in the catch process and also involved in the grant process. So in your packet, you have a wealth of material that we don't intend to go through, but we thought it would be helpful, since this is only year 2, to give you the guidelines and the process and just a refresher from the historical information we provided last year. But I would like to do is turn it over to Rachel, because the exciting thing is, what did the outcome of last year's funding curtail for the city? And then what are the recommendations going forward and the opportunities from those grants? Rachel?
Thank you, Cindy. It's a pleasure to be here tonight, sitting in front of you. As Cindy mentioned, I'll go over the results of last year's, which was FY13, but actually not a year ago, just 7 short months ago. The results from those grants were amazing. We have several completed programs in just over 6-month time period. A few of those are Creative Cauldron's World of Stories program. They actually came back for another grant this year because it's been so successful. They've already had 8 performances, and they actually have another one scheduled next week. So it's doing well in the elementary schools here in the city and the greater city area. We also have the Village Preservation and Improvement Society. They created a community closet for period accurate clothing that is already actually self-sustaining. They have received a couple donations. So not only have they completed their project goals, but they're actually exceeding them. So that's pretty exciting. As Cindy mentioned, we have Nikki and Ed Henderson here tonight. They applied last year for their audio tour. And I've heard that they're almost completely done with that. Is that right? Yep. So almost done. So we have several completed projects and some almost there. The environmental system for Cherry Hill Farmhouse is already installed and recording information, so it's really exciting. And more details on every single grant that was applied for and funded for FY13 is in attachment C, which begins, let's see, line 385. So that's for your reference. This year, it was much more competitive. We had 9 applicants and proposals, and you can see in attachment A, starting on line 243, the breakdown of applicants and requested amounts. It's really exciting to have such a competitive process, because the whole reason that this process is in place is we wanted to find out how best to spend this money, and this process gives us a really good roadmap for that. So some of the grants mentioned here, as I said, was World of Stories. Watch Night is recommended for funding by the Grants Review Committee this year to expand the program there. And I think we've all been to Watch Night before, being city residents. It's an annual event. The Virtual Visitor Center, which is one of the Little City Catch Foundation staples, cornerstone of what they're doing. We're hoping to fund that so that it is completed. And the Trail Markers program is going to be continued this year. I think a few of you were at the dedication ceremony. We have one right over on Cherry Hill for last year's FY13 grants. We're going to carry that on through. And then we have a couple recommended for the VCA grant again this year. The participation program and the Sights and Sounds. Very interesting programs. Excited about especially the music videos for Sights and Sounds, original music videos based on history here in the city. So that sounds very appealing, at least for new age technology. So if you'd like, we can answer any questions.
Great.
And then just for timing and sort of the fiscal impact, this is recommending the city's $20,000 local funding, as well as the 2 applications that would be submitted to the state's Virginia Commission for Arts grant, which will come up in the spring. But the committee reviewed it all in a comprehensive way, so we're recommending, as you see on attachment A, the Sights and Sound, and the participation one would be $2,500 each, and then match with the state money if it's awarded next spring, which we've been successful for. And so this would be the dollar for dollar match. Decided now, so we're prepared as soon as the application comes out.
Great, thank you. And I just wanted to, just a bit of quick brief history about the grant program. I believe that it was Councilmember Barry who sort of approached me about this a little bit as far as the way that we were doing the funding was a little bit one-off, and that there needed to be a more formal way of doing it, so all the groups are treated fairly. So thanks to Councilmember Barry for raising this and ultimately getting this together. So we've got a grant program, and hopefully we'll have every year we'll be able to fund at least some of the grants. So a shout out to Councilmember Barry for helping bring this forward. And I'm glad that it was successful. Other questions? Ms. Barry?
I'm always curious to know what happens to the people who don't get funded. So, speaking as someone who often doesn't get funded, do you have any sense? I mean, for instance, I'm a little disappointed about First Friday films because I'm a big film fan. But I don't know if this question is for the Hendersons or the Tinner Hill Foundation or whatever. But as you consider the grants, I presume that there are sort of fallback plan B, plan C, or does some stuff just simply not move forward?
Well, let me give an initial answer and see if Rachel has any additional comments. The catch has very specific guidelines and goals and outcomes, and so the grants committee, which is independent of anybody who submitted an application, looked very closely to make sure that it was consistent with the goals and outcomes. And so that, tied with not having enough money to fund everything, results in the competitive process that Rachel referred to. Each non-funded entity got a personal outreach. In some of these cases, they didn't quite align with the goals and guidelines, so they were given some technical assistance on how they might be more competitive in the future. And then we do have some situations where you have the EDA with their grant program that's more targeted towards economic development and marketing, and it might be more appropriate there because these are intentionally different, although they're complementary and they all have an economic outcome benefit as well as the arts and culture. They're not identical, and so one may be suited to the other. And then there's always next year because we will be optimistic that this will have a third year of funding.
That's what I was going to say. We, as Cindy mentioned, we had all of the denied proposals. There was a personal outreach where we tried to really encourage reapplication of the same idea or a new idea. We don't want to deny anyone funding, but it is limited funds. And that's probably the biggest difference between last cycle and this cycle is we had less applicants, but the requested funds went up by over $12,000. So unfortunately, we can't fund every project. And that is the purpose of a competitive process, is to fund the, projects that best meet the guidelines, which start on on line 487. So the GRC recommended for funding the projects that most consistently and best met all of these guidelines. So.
Thank you.
Mr. Kelly?
Thank you. Obviously, the budget issues are with us for the foreseeable future. That having been said, this would have been one of the areas that, if it was possible, though I don't frankly see it, is worthy of additional funding because of the impact on the civic sense and the community sense. It's hard to quantify. But to put the other end of the bookend, I don't see where the extra money will come from. If it does appear Brigadoon-like, snatch it, be a nice idea.
Mr. Duncan?
The difference in the amount of money requested, if I'm looking at this right, and the chart on 239, 38,652 was asked for, is that right?
Mm-hmm.
And we gave away 20,000, so the difference is $18,000, 18.6.
I'm sorry, Councilman Duncan, I meant from last fiscal year's request to this fiscal year's request. Last year, it was requested just over the amount allotted with the extra state funding. This year, it's well over that amount.
And so with the state funding, we'll be able to award 25,000, but the requests are 38.6.
Okay, so somewhere Somewhere under $20,000 is the difference. Okay.
Other council members? Cindy, just one question. As far as other grant and funding available, we mentioned the state funding. Is there any other funding sources that we can also draw in from?
There are different opportunities, and I've worked with the Tinner Hill Heritage Foundation on several. You always have the National Park Service, you have the National Arts, NEA. We certainly go for the Virginia one, that one is particularly targeted to local governments because they want to stimulate local government support, so you have the dollar for dollar match. So there's always ones we could pursue. You know, on specific projects, which we'll talk on the next one in terms of the historic site at Tinner Hill, we have Regional Park Authority CIP funding, and with Delegate Scott's assistance last year, we have a $50,000 grant, of which $20,000 will go to Tinner Hill, $20,000 will Creative Cauldron, and $10,000 is for wayfinding signage in South Washington area plan area. So there's always opportunities. Most of the challenge is making sure we have the grant money if it's more than an in-kind staff support.
Great. Thank you very much.
Just one tiny, listen.
Please.
And just a provocative thing I'd like to throw in here. Given the dynamics of the City of Falls Church, I think it'd be ingenious if we reached out to individuals to match gifts. There are plenty of people in the City of Falls Church who could write a check for $5,000. I'd like to know who they are, and I get first crack at them. But you know that that's true, and I think that this, I mean, given all the interest of many of the residents of the City of Falls Church in these issues, I think it'd be kind of fun to throw out that challenge and ask for individual matches to key projects.
I think you see that with a lot of support that we get for the Blues Festival, for example. I know in Watch Night, there's been a lot of community and business support, but one of the foundation's goals is to have a larger grants program besides that, which is funded by the city. This is intended to be a seed to build then a broader and bigger grants program that could be matched by somebody else.
Yep, you bet.
Okay. Right. So place this on the calendar for next week. Everybody good? All right.
And next up is the Tinner Hill lease. Thank you, Rachel. While I know this meeting's going on, but I want to, while Danny is here, give a chance to brag on our new beach volleyball setup out in Cherry Hill Park, which was an initiative of a Eagle Scout who came to the city with an idea, and we worked with him and we figured it out. And through that initiative, with the help of Public Works and Rec and Parks, we've got a great product out there.
Yeah.
So it's a nice thing.
Yeah. Yay. It was impressive. And I have to say, I was watching it being constructed, and it was being done right. They laid a really good base, and
That's a California man. You know how to
Yeah.
do it right.
I haven't tested it yet, but
If I could, there's
You need a
Eagle
mic,
Scout
Danny.
projects. I don't know if this was official or unofficial.
We just need you on the TV.
every Eagle Scout in town?
I know, right?
Crowdsource the whole party.
Yeah.
There are Eagle Scout projects, and then there are major Eagle Scout projects, and this one fell into that category. And I don't think initially it was meant to be that way, but the gentleman that did it, Adam Martin, took a lot of time in engineering this product. And if you go out there right now, it's almost like an iceberg. You can look at it and say, oh, cool, they threw a bunch of sand down and there's a new sand volleyball court. But the time and energy that went into it, and then the community spirit that was out there on Saturday and again on Sunday, and they got very tired as Sunday went on, but the engineering that went into it and the thought process, and then the work that came about through both city staff and all the community, it really was a neat event for the different Eagle Scout projects that we've done, the successful ones we've had. This one was really they're taking it up a notch. So, thank you.
great. Danny, can I ask that a letter be prepared on behalf of council, acknowledging the good work that was done
To
to the Eagle Scout?
absolutely.
One quick question. Was it a major engineering challenge or to integrate the root system in the park into the playing field?
Well, the answer is yes. There was a lot of work, and the arborist, and there was
The
a lot
arborist
of
was very
people that went
concerned
into
about
it. So it was something that.
I was just kidding, that's all.
No, it was okay. Yes, it was fun.
I can imagine.
And as a Californian, a beach volleyball court in a park, in a wooded park, is always interesting.
That's what I mean.
When we have a concert out there that is beach music, I think you should just move the chairs and put them right in the sand.
There we go.
And we were working on having the beach today when the rain came through. We almost had, the whole water thing happening out there.
Oh, no.
Thanks.
Okay, Tenor Hill Historic Site update. Cindy.
And this is a very positive one, and of course, Ed and Nikki are here with us this evening as key partners representing the Tenor Hill Heritage Foundation on this process. We were last before council in August to give you an update, and we thought that it would be good to give an update at this work session, because in 2 weeks, the agenda's pretty full. But we hope at the end of the month to be bringing formal action to council, so this is a sort of a briefing and a heads up. But since we last spoke in August, we've done a lot of work with city and county staff, the Regional Park Authority, and Tenor Hill Heritage Foundation to move the legal documents forward as council gave us concurrence that August. So we are drafting a lease that will be between the county, city, and the Regional Park Authority, a conservation easement that would protect the historic nature of this site for the intended purpose for which it was purchased back in 1999. There's been good work with Ed and Nikki and Paul Gilbert of the Regional Park Authority to establish an MOU with the roles and responsibilities for designing, programming, and maintaining the park. And then in order to ensure state code requirements under what we fondly refer to as Section 2232, which is basically to make sure the comp plan consistency. We are doing that process. For the county, they're running through the lease in the 2232 because that needs approval both through the Planning Commission, the Board of Supervisors. For the city, all of these items will come for formal council action, but the 2232 will go through the Planning Commission, and that's scheduled for October 21st for the Planning Commission to give their endorsement before council acts. So our goal will be to bring first reading October 28th. Because the city code requires for lease that be an ordinance, and we'll just run all the other items, which can be resolution, concurrently. We are in the final throes of doing the language review, and so we're going to get a full group together of all these parties so that we have one more round of the legal reviews, and so that all parties concur with the legal docs before they come to you on the 28th. You can see in the memo a broad outline of our plan where we hope that we will have all of the legal processes on county and city side and the foundation signed, executed, including the MOU with the foundation and the Park Authority by February, so we can start initial development and have a grand opening celebration next summer. And part of what will make that a reality is the good news that you see noted here, where the Regional Park Authority recently in their CIP just 2 weeks ago approved $175,000 for the phase 1. And the grant that I mentioned a moment ago with Delegate Scott's assistance at the General Assembly in the budget, $20,000 will be allocated towards that to get us the first phase kickoff. And then as we spoke last August, and the link is on the memo to the full website, you saw the full Tenor Hill Heritage Foundation concept plan in the phase 2 and the additional fundraising that will need to continue. But we will have a working park that tells the story and then can also be what leverages and gets the excitement going to finish the fundraising and the full development. Maybe with some economic redevelopment along North Washington Street that can help leverage that. So with that, Ed, Nikki, or I would be glad to answer any questions, and we're really pleased to be at this point and hope to be finished by the end of the year.
Great. All right. Nikki or Ed, did you have anything to add? I think, Mickey, we need one of the mics.
Yeah, just come on in.
We're very excited to be making progress that people can actually see. We've spent the last 5 years doing a great deal of research and documentation that relate to Tenor Hill and the overall history of the South Washington area and the community that lived there before, during, and after the Civil War. And I think that the city will be very proud to have and I want everybody to practice saying the Tenor Hill Historic Site. It's much more than a park. It's a very important parcel of land that will convey the history that the city of Falls Church will be very proud of. And while there'll be some park-like elements on the site, I think that the connections to Tenor Hill, the reserve at Tenor Hill, the Henderson House, and the Heritage Trail will connect us in a very significant way with the rest of the city. So we're very pleased and very happy, very proud that the project is moving forward in a way that I think is going to be very exciting and tantalizing for not only city residents but visitors as well.
Great. Thanks very much. All right, questions? Phil, do you have anything?
No question, but I did just want to say I was out at Waterford this weekend at the Waterford Festival, which I'm sure most everybody here has already been to. It's the first time I'd ever been there, and they make quite a lot of their African-American heritage in Waterford. The schoolhouse that was built still stands and is still used for educational activities for the young kids. And, of course, when they have the Waterford Festival and other historical markers and places around town are emphasize that aspect of their history. And I look forward to being able to do the same thing here in Falls Church. We do it a little bit now. We do it some now. But I think it'll be a real asset for us. Thanks.
Thanks. Any other comments?
And I should also mention that in connection with the Tenor Hill Historic Site, the Henderson House has now been officially recognized as the home of Basketball Hall of Famer Edwin B. Henderson. So we're on the map nationally, and I hope that we will be as proud as all the folks up in Massachusetts were.
Great. All right, anything else? All right, very exciting. So looking forward to this coming back. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, we are on to council member comments and schedules. Mr. Cameron.
I've asked Cindy to circulate an issue I'd like to discuss tonight regarding the school fund balance. There were some questions I had and some issues for the city council. This apparently was approved by the city schools in April. I was unaware of it until very recently, and I'm also quite aware that we cannot dictate to the schools how they use their fund balance or how they use their resource. However, there were some questions that I have about this. I asked John Foster to look into them, but John has indicated that he can't answer them because it represents a conflict of interest. So we're in an awkward position in which an employee of ours can't tell us about an issue that affects the council. I have understood your explanation, but I would be disingenuous if I said that it makes sense to me. However, let me go forward and see what we can get for answers. According to this policy, the school board will be reconstituting its fund balance at 2% per year, or could reconstitute it at 2% per year. Is this cumulative, so it could be added so that they could be, let's say, next year they could have a balance starting out at, $700,000. And then the next year, another $700,000 added to that? Or is it limited to just 2% of the budget of that year? Maybe we could start out with that question. Can you answer that, since apparently you approved this fund balance?
Mr. Kalen, for the reasons that I had explained to you earlier today, I have provided legal advice to the school board. The school board and the superintendent are my client, and so I cannot advise you or the city council on this policy. It creates a conflict of interest, and I can't get.
I'm just asking for an explanation of how it's
But
supposed to function.
you're asking me to interpret a policy that I've advised the school board on, and, it's unfortunate that we have to, play this out in public, but
How do we
again,
get the information?
I can reiterate that it is a conflict of interest, and I cannot interpret the policy for you this evening or at any point. I'd laid out options for you when we spoke earlier today. If the city council as a body shares your concerns about this policy issue, they can adopt a motion to retain outside counsel to provide advice on the issue, but I cannot do that. I share your frustration, but Rule 1.7 of the Virginia ethical rules are very clear, and I cannot violate them.
Well,
Question?
well, can possibly.
I think it's more of a substantive
it's a-
policy
yeah, I
question
don't know
than
if
it
it's
is
a
a
legal
legal question, and so I'd be happy to discuss it with the superintendent, because I think we could get an answer to the question about how they would interpret the policy. And if the council wished to have further discussion of it, we could also have a discussion of it in terms of the soundness of a policy from a fiscal management perspective as well. But I'm not prepared for that discussion tonight.
I'm gonna, go ahead, Johanna, then I'll let you come back.
Okay, I want to try to understand why John is in this position. This is I would have thought that this is a fiscal issue. So it's Richard's advice. But am I understanding that John was asked if this is legal under the structure that the school board and the city council enjoy? I mean, is that the question that was asked of you? Because I'm trying to figure out why this is a legal issue as opposed to a management or a financial issue.
I can't get into detailed discussion as to the legal advice that I gave the school board and the superintendent. I can tell you that I did provide them legal advice on this policy, and that's as far as I can go. It's frustrating, but let me just say this. When someone's bar license gets pulled, guess whose it is? It's mine. And I'm not going to put myself in the position of having it pulled or having my ethics challenged. I've got a 21-year legal career. Never had an ethics complaint filed against me. I'm not going to start now.
John, hand to God, this had nothing, never would anyone accuse you of playing fast and loose. And I was about to make a bar joke, because there's mixology classes that they have in Arlington, should anything happen to your bar license, okay? But no, I honestly wasn't, I was trying to figure out why this was a legal question, and you're saying it was, the schools sought advice, you provided that advice, and so presumably this, Ron, is a legal issue?
Any interpretation of a policy with someone who helped them draft the policy, I would take the exact same position.
I don't.
When I've been deposed and they say, please explain what this contract means, you drafted it, and you have to take the same position.
I don't want to get too far. Wait, Ira. I mean, I don't want to get too far ahead. I mean, John reviews numerous documents for both the school board and for city council. So again, I'm not gonna, keep pressing John on this, because I don't think it's fruitful to say what advice. It's clear that he can't do that without violating his ethical obligations, and it could be that he as simple as he reviewed it and gave it a clearance, or he asked, or there were specific questions asked. I don't think we're going to get an answer to that. So why don't we get to the substance of the issue
I'm
rather?
not finished, Nader. It's not what I asked John. I asked him a different question, and I'd like to be able to explain what I actually asked.
Well, if you want to go ahead and ask the substance, but I think
just tell you
pressing
what
John
I'm
about
not gonna
that is
press
not
him.
going to move anything forward.
I'm just going to tell you what I asked.
But
Okay?
what role does he have in this? This is up to the school board to answer with their interpretations. I don't
that's-
think it's even appropriate.
I was
for
told
him.
by a school board member, you know, who had told me about this, I had no idea it had been approved, that it had been approved by John, and I talked to him, so I did it. A school board member. Number 3, it contradicts 1 and 2. So I was just asking why that was. I mean, it made no sense to me. That was my question. Since this was something that's a general counsel issue, one would say, perhaps, you know, you gotta work it out so that the clauses aren't contradictory. Okay? They're contradictory, so when it comes to the council and the school board says, well, this is approved by the legal counsel, I just wanted to find out what, now, John has said this and has gotten his umbrage up. I'm not questioning your ethics, John. I think it was an oversight. I think, even the way it's drafted, just trying to.
But it's not John's policy, it's the school board's policy. The only people who can explain to us what they think it means are the school board. It's their policy. John's just an advisor who gave them advice. It has nothing to do with what the policy
Well,
means.
that's what I was curious about, what was the advice?
Okay.
Okay, he's made it clear, he can't say, but I wanted to know how, as an advice, as a general counsel, not as an attorney, he would have advised them that this was okay.
Right, but he can't tell us
Can't do
that
that.
because
Yeah.
we're not the school board.
Okay, so I'm bringing it up here because he said he can't do it, okay?
So I guess the question, Mr. Kalin, that you want to get to is how is the school board squaring 1 and 3?
No, it's more than that. Now that I had that additional, that's one issue, but I'd like to know whether this could add up over time to a fund balance, a school fund balance that could be in the millions of dollars.
So 2 questions then: how would the school board square 1 and 3, and whether the fund balance can be cumulative?
Remember,
Right.
if it's used for operational expenses every year, this is an automatic increase in the school's budget, an organic increase. Even before the first budget is prepared, can be 2% increase. Because it's an operating expense that is now converted into the base of the next year's budget, even if you don't spend it. So then, you don't spend it, can you add another 600 to 700,000 each year going forward? Have we now just codified the same problem we had before? On top of that, it says, in excess of 2, you could do capital projects or non-recurring projects of non-recurring nature or operational needs. That can't be.
Why don't we direct, can I speak?
Yeah, go ahead. Dave.
Why don't we direct these questions to the school board?
Okay.
I
I
think
mean, that's the body that can answer. John has explained why he can't. I think his explanation is as an attorney, is totally appropriate, and I support it. But I think the question is rightfully directed at the school board. And I think we should give a list of questions we'd like to ask them or responses we'd like, and then get them, and then
Do
go.
you need to write them out, why, or do you think it's clear up?
Well, do we want this a communication from the full city council?
Mr. Mayor, can I ask a question related to that? Is this the sort of topic that would be normally discussed at the November 14th joint session?
My suggestion to the council would be that we've got a full agenda that night, and I don't think we need to add this on top of that. So I would rather separate this out from that. That would be my suggestion to the rest of the council.
So, even though it's a budget planning session, it's hard to. So we would like to get an answer to these questions before that session. Is that
Yes.
what you're saying? Okay, I see. Okay, thanks.
Mr. Kalin?
As I mentioned to you over the phone, I have no intention, never had any intention, would never try to put your bar license in danger. Just trying to explain how we backed into this sideways. the situation, that the request was not frivolous on my part, and why, because I was told by a member of the school board that you were the person that could speak to my concerns. That's why I called you.
All right, and I think the schools adopted this based on a discussion that we had with them at some point about trying to figure out how the fund balance and what the policy objectives were. I think that's sort of why this is coming up. But again, as was mentioned before, I think ultimately it's their policy, and certainly we can discuss it with them and try to understand it better. And I think that's what we're trying to do tonight. So I think there's 3 questions as I counted them.
Could I add a 4th while we're at it?
Why don't we just make sure that we've got the first 3 and then add as we go on, since Wyatt is perhaps going to be doing some of the communicating. So the first question was, how do you square 1 and 3, given that they appear to be internally inconsistent?
1, 2, and 3.
1, 2, and then 3. And then 2, would the fund balance carry over from year to year?
Right.
So it could grow. Then I guess part of that would it be part of the base and the transfer request? I think there was a part A to that I heard, which was the accumulating effect. And would it be used as a base as you move forward if you did utilize part of that?
Or it didn't use part.
Or didn't use part of it. But it would be whether it's going to be used as part of the base as it rolls over, assuming that it can roll over. So those would be a series of questions that Mr. Kalin had. Mr. Duncan?
Then my 4th would be, how does this 2% count into the city's overall fund balance policy of a target of 12 to 17%? Is this outside of that 17%, or would it somehow be incorporated into it, particularly if they are thinking of using it for expenses that are basically expenses we approve as part of the budget?
Well, that's a that's a question directed, I think, to the city staff. Under the council policy as it is enacted and written, the school board's fund balance does not count as city fund balance.
Okay, so this would be in excess of whatever we run as a fund balance they would have on top of.
Correct.
And John, I'm going to ask you sort of a question. Feel free to answer no to this, but it just sort of, I want to make sure that we're labeling this correctly, because I sort of had this vague memory that could be faulty about whether what the schools have is truly a fund balance. I had some recollection that there could only be one fund balance, and what the schools were carrying was something different. Just for
What we can do is provide you the charter language. There is charter language that is unique to the City of Falls Church, relative to most jurisdictions in Virginia, in terms of how the school division is allowed to keep fund balance.
I guess all I need to know is, can we call it a fund balance, or are we just being sloppy with the language?
Yeah, so we can we can check in on that and try to be as precise as possible.
And John, if you can't be part of that's fine. I don't know if that's part of the discussion or not. I just want to make sure that we're using precise enough language.
I'll look into it.
We produce our comprehensive annual financial report, and it has a line called fund balance, and this is approved by our external auditors, so that's what we call it.
Okay. Phil, did you have anything else before we move to Ms. Berry? Ms. Berry?
Yeah, I just again wanted to get back to basics. So this was put forward by the school board and received legal counsel and review, and presumably received financial counsel and review. So it would be reasonable for the school board to assume that this policy has integrity, has financial integrity and legal integrity. Is that fair to say without compromising your mixology license? Mr. Foster.
I can tell you that I did review the policy, and I provided legal advice to the school board and the superintendent on the policy. I'll let Mr. LeCondre speak as to, his involvement. I'll leave it at that.
I can tell you that I was not involved in reviewing the policy.
Okay, now I get to play lawyer. Was anyone in your office involved in reviewing this policy and gave advice to our colleagues on city council? Oh, Lord God, our city schools.
Three-way conflict.
I think
God, what did
Mr.
you know
LeCondre
and when did you know
Is
it?
going to take the Fifth Amendment.
He's going-
I recommend that you take the Fifth Amendment.
That's the fifth.
Oh! That's all.
Yeah, I mean,
wanted to
it's-
know.
Let me say this.
That is just.
My best recollection is the school board undertook to put in writing what their fund balance policy should be. There was never any intent, my recollection only, of my office to be involved in it at all. I got no copy of a fund balance policy from the school board.
All right. Anything else?
Yeah, sorry. Are we done with that, or are we on to?
That's kind of exciting, though, wasn't it?
Oh, it's very exciting.
Yeah.
Well, I just had a couple of scheduled questions.
Yeah, and it just...
Is it time for that? No.
Yeah, but just, I want to make sure that we have the right tone on this going forward. I just want to be
yeah.
clear that ultimately the school
It's their-
board can set their financial policies.
Absolutely.
We're trying to get a better understanding of what the policy is
And how it was
and,
conceived.
and how it's conceived and sort of how it would be potentially implemented as we move forward on the heels of the budget process. So, but again, they have the ability to set their own policies, and I want to just be clear that we're not getting into that, but simply trying to understand the policy better since we weren't part of those discussions.
Right.
Mr. Callen?
Well, I think that's how I started out my
I'm
intervention.
not suggesting it was started out differently. I
Okay,
just
that
want it
I'm
to
well
be
aware,
clear of
having
how
done this,
it should be toned moving forward.
that we can't tell the school board how to set anything other than the final number. I've had that beaten into me. It's part of my DNA now.
I think we all want to back up.
That's
You really should have gotten them with the
The purple.
not the issue. But this came up, I mean, I spent numerous hours, and frankly, if I was charging the consulting fee that I normally charge, it would have been in the multiple thousands of dollars for the amount of time that I put in to analyze and understand this particular issue. And we certainly, I mean, I only found that out by accident. There's no circulation to the city council that I'm aware of. Are you aware of any that was circulated to the? So this was done for themselves apparently. And then I read it, and it's different than, well, for the reasons I just mentioned to you, all of the issues that I raised in the previous summer about the $3 million that had accumulated in the school's fund balance were now codified and allowed by policy, including some contradictory phrases. Nader, you will be here when this comes up in the budget. It's very useful to know before the budget starts where you stand and what budget you're actually approving. Otherwise, it gets buried in page 111 of the CAFR, and no one has any idea except people who read these things would know.
All right. Mr. Duncan.
You are duly warned.
I'm duly warned.
Man. A lecture that wasn't directed at me. I'm so excited.
No, the mayor gets lectured. Hey, it's
Those are serious questions, and I
have a
look
feeling we're
forward to
all going to be getting lectured soon enough.
I hear Mr. Kalen's concerns. I just wanted to ask about November 4th. The work session will be canceled.
Yes.
Okay, so sometimes I try to make plans to visit my parents, and so I can buy a cheaper.
Let's just make sure everybody.
Is that possible?
Are we planning on canceling it?
So that is the plan.
Well, it says canceled. I mean, that's election day.
Monday before the election. But then note, on Thursday, November 14th, there would be a special meeting, so there's no freebies in this.
Yes, no.
And that would be joint with the school board at TJ Elementary School.
Everybody good with that?
Yay.
That's fine. That's not on a weekend. And the other is all the way at the bottom. Am I the only person who notices this elephant in the room? Again, making travel plans over the holidays with kids who are in college and so forth. Are we really swearing in the new council on December 9th?
No.
Yeah, that's weird.
And,
No,
and
that's
what
a
happens to
mistake.
us?
I would hate to see Ms. Berry and Mr. Kayla and
Yeah.
Mr. Pepe go so
I
soon.
don't know how that got on there.
I would hate, and I know they will miss me, so they would not want to
It's-
leave too soon.
I'm
I think
getting
that's
Okay, so that's just
that's-
not. That's a
thinking
that's
about that, Phil.
that's a
Phil, thanks for catching that one.
puddly.
But we do have a discussion we need to have about.
I say New Year's Day.
Never mind. We don't want to have it tonight.
I was
We'll
going to
have it
say,
another
you don't
way.
want to have that discussion tonight,
Never mind.
probably. But I did want to say on another separate note that the last two water forums, discussions that we've had, I thought were very good, substantive. The city one last Saturday, right? Just televised, and people who didn't get a chance to go should go to it on cable or online or wherever it is. And we should publicize that it is out there. Vice Mayor Snyder was one of the people there and had some good comments. And then last Thursday night, Mr. Kalen and others came to the CBC Democrat Republican sponsored water discussion at John Clinton's house. A very good crowd for that, better than the crowd that Saturday. Mr. Kalen's information and presentation was very well received. Thought it was very helpful. And sorry that we didn't tape that, because it would have been nice to have that for the archives too. But anyway, I just wanted to thank both Vice Mayor Snyder and Mr. Kalen for coming to those two events and helping. I do have a. He was at the Saturday one. You were at the Thursday one, right? I do have a vague still sense that we're putting out a lot of information, but people still haven't locked in. And I know we still have 30 days, a month before the election, but just want us to be flexible about the notion that we might need to put something on Dead Tree Media somewhere at some point. If people aren't coming to these forums in droves, and if they're not checking the online sites, the information's all out there now. If anybody wants to look at it, they can find it. But sometimes if it's in print somewhere, even if they don't read it, they think, oh, okay, well, I've been informed, and I'm okay with it. We just don't want people voting no because they think that somebody was trying to hide something from them. So that's just my parting thought for right now on that.
Mr. Kalen?
Actually, one of the interesting things, it was a very good meeting with the CBC, but an interesting thought came out because of the problem of communication. And it's really hard. At a certain point, you can make a lot of extra effort and get very marginal benefits in terms of having people to answer questions at the polling stations. Because people show up and who do I vote for? What does this mean? They just don't start to ask until they're actually there. Maybe it would be useful to have just to answer questions. I know we may not be able to advocate as a body, but to answer questions, and certainly I would be willing to go to one of the polls and say questions about the water referendum. No good?
I can't imagine that at a polling, stand there and say anything other than helping with translation. I can't imagine that that's legal.
You mean outside?
Outside
Yeah, there's a limit. You have to, what is it, a couple 100 feet or something like that?
There's a certain distance you have to stay from the polling place, but, I can get the specifics on that.
Following on what he said, there was a discussion that was stimulated by Mr. Kalen and others' comments Thursday night that there ought to be a private group that forms to advocate for
I
this.
actually, this is an issue that I raised with John, and I believe John was going to look into that,
As to whether we can.
there could be an organization that's at arm's length from the city, and what they could do and couldn't do. And again, they wouldn't be acting on behalf of the city.
Right. I think they're private individuals who are interested in doing it, and we know enough about campaign finance regs to know that as long as they do it through a political action committee that is set up and duly registered with the SBE, then they can do what they are allowed to do, what such a group is allowed to do.
So I think John's looking at that.
Yeah, I mean, I certainly, I've reached some conclusions I can report out. I mean, now or at another appropriate time, whatever you'd prefer.
I think, given the timing, we may.
Yeah, I mean, we certainly a private organization could be formed, or it's already in existence, can certainly take an advocacy position. There's no legal prohibition on that. So, I'd be up to city council, get your thoughts on it. But, one that comes to mind for me is the CBC or similar organization is already in existence, may be able to do it. That's obviously going to be their call. If they don't want to do it, then they're, as Mr. Duncan mentioned, there are groups of citizens who certainly want to take the lead on that. They can. There's no legal problem with them doing that.
This was an idea that came up at the meeting. It actually was not something that I had even thought of. It was come up by the members of the CBC, whether this was a possibility. I thought it was intriguing. I hadn't thought of it. But given the fact that people come to the polls often very uninformed and then try to gather data at the last minute if someone was there to help them get the information.
Ms. Berry?
Just a reminder that I know Mr. Pepe and I are involved in a CBC function on Wednesday. It'll be held at the Creative Cauldron on talking about transportation issues. Yep. And so there's everybody is encouraged to come out and discuss a range of local and regional transportation issues. We will be presenting along with Paul Handley and Sally's moderating. I can't remember who the fourth presenter is. Okay. And John, is there a way that we can understand the language of the ordinance? Do people get to see that in advance? I mean, how?
This is the referendum question?
Yeah.
Or?
Mm-hmm. I'm sorry, yes.
Yeah, the referendum question is publicly available. I know we've distributed it at the town hall meetings. And so, certainly if you want to discuss offline additional steps you think ought to be taken for distribution of that, I can work with Wyatt and Amy from communications.
Is it on any city, is it on a sample ballot?
Yes, the
SBE sample
SBE
ballot?
has prepared a sample ballot, as I understand it. Yes.
Anything else on
I'm sorry.
questions
That-
on the schedule or anything else?
I'm sorry to go with the one thing other thing you reminded me of. The group that Mr. Kalin talks about would certainly be able to enlist Mr. Kalin to stand at the polls and answer those questions if they wanted to. So that is a possibility. Separate though, one question that was asked by a citizen that I didn't have the answer for was, what about that story in the paper today, and that was Thursday that we had that meeting, about Fairfax Water and the health care situation. You all may have seen it. It was a pretty substantial article at the bottom of the page. I didn't read it until we got home from the event at the Clintons. And I must say that I would be interested. I feel like we need an answer to people who are asking, is the sale of the water system going to affect our employees' health coverage situation? Because that was basically the question asked.
We saw the same article and had questions about that. We got a satisfactory response from Fairfax Water. It's not a concern, but I'd be happy to have a more detailed conversation with you offline. Yeah. It's just awkward for me to speak about Fairfax Water's policy statement, so let me follow up with you all offline.
Okay. And we have a short closed session item as well. Upon a motion made by Councilmember
Barry.
And seconded by Councilmember. I need a second, please. Kalin. And passed by a voice vote of City Council. Council went into closed session pursuant to 2.2-3711A7, consultation with legal counsel employed or retained by public body regarding specific legal matters requiring the provision of legal advice by such counsel. Mayor Baruch, yes. Vice Mayor Snyder is absent. Councilmember Barry.
Yes.
Councilmember Kalin. Yes. Councilmember Kalin. Yes. Councilmember Barry. Yes. Vice Mayor Snyder is absent. Councilmember Barry. Yes. Councilmember Duncan.
Yes.
Councilmember Callan.
Yes.
Councilmember Pepe.
Yes.
Councilmember Tartar.
Yes.
And we're gonna go out at 9:40.